I'm McKinley Corbley, and you're listening to the Pro PTN Podcast, an interview talk show for piano technicians to tune in to what the pros are talking about from across the industry. If you enjoyed today's episode, show us some love by following us on your podcasting platform and leaving us a review. To learn more about us here at the Professional Piano Technicians Network, visit us at proptn.org. Hello and welcome to the show. Today I am very excited to welcome the man, the myth, the legend, Cheng, a revered Pennsylvania piano technician with more than 20 years of experience on everything from managing university contracts and player system maintenance to action rebuilding and concert tuning. In addition to being one of the co-owners of Allied Piano and Finish, an industry supply company specializing in piano refinishing and product distribution, Greg is also one of the co-founders of Pro PTN. Greg, welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you for having me on.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So to start us off, can you give us a brief synopsis of your career and the kind of work that you've done?
Okay, so brief synopsis of my careers. I've been in piano technology since 1999. It has been a first career for me. I started learning piano technology when I was in college getting my degree for trumpet performance. At the time, that school became an all-Steinway school, and the local Steinway dealership basically scooped me right up out of the college and put me to work right away. Since I was already versed in piano tuning, they put me on furniture repair and player system details. So I was doing furniture repair on after-delivery services and when customers called in, as well as diagnosing and repairing all sorts of player systems. So that spawned my career up until recently, I would say 2019. Steve Taylor came to me in late 2018 and basically said, I want to buy Allied Piano. And he said, I will only do it if you do it with me. And I said, of course, I'm in. At the time, I was getting frustrated at my job, and it was one of those things where I wanted something for myself, and this was the pathway to do it.
Does that contribute a lot to your day-to-day work as a technician, or do you feel like you have to juggle the two side by side?
It's a lot of juggling. Lately, I'm just on the road all the time, making sure all the customers are happy, taking care of dealership and manufacturer warranty issues, as well as just general piano tuning for all the customers in the Philadelphia region. The sales side of Allied Piano gets to be quite a bit hectic. We've hired a couple of people to help out with that, both the technical side and the sales side. But Steve and I have a pretty even split. I mean, he's in the office, he's managing the sales and the shipping and taking the orders while, I'm on the road, and my associate Fawn just started with helping out with phones and scheduling customers.
Golly. So what was the process of buying Allied Piano like?
Well, it kind of fell in our laps. The first owner was Webb Phillips, and then when he passed away, his wife, Ruth Phillips, now Ruth Ziner, owned Allied Piano, and she was getting to the point where she wanted to slow down and retire. So the option was either it goes away or we keep it going.
So out of curiosity, if you were to offer advice or tips or insights on what technicians might expect if they're looking to buy another technician's business or something along those lines, can you tell us what we might expect?
Okay, that's a complicated question. In the case of Allied Piano, there are physical and liquid assets, actual assets, dam chaser systems, parts, and shelvings, and units, and a warehouse, and all that stuff. And we purchased those assets. As a piano technician buying another piano technician's business, from a personal side, kind of wouldn't do it. Because, in my case, where else are they going to go? The customers. Right. And there's no guarantee that, so you pay X amount of dollars for somebody's database, which is the right thing to do. But at the end of the day, there's no guarantee that those customers are going to follow you unless it is done right.
I have often thought the same thing, which it's very validating to hear elsewhere as well. Great. Okay, I also wanted to circle back to something else you said, which is that you were doing player work in the late 90s. What are some of the differences that you see in player work then versus now? How have things become more complex or different in general?
To tell you the truth, things have gotten a lot easier. A lot easier.
Phew.
So, like for instance, in the case of Yamaha disc lavir, they have the control unit that's located underneath the keyboard, and you have your display and your floppy disk and your CD-ROM drive and all that stuff. All that stuff is gone, and you just use your phone to control the piano, which is amazing. So in one way, like you take away that interface, and everybody's used to using their Apples or their Androids to control their piano. You don't have to worry about, oh, is the floppy disk bad or is it the floppy disk drive?
I took your class on that and I loved it, and it really did make it feel a lot easier. But yeah, the floppy disks are. It's nice to not have to worry about the floppy disks.
Yes. And by today's standards, when you run into systems that have floppy disk drives, whether it's a Yamaha disc lavir or a QRS or piano disc or whatever, 9 times out of 10, it's hard to find OEM support for those units because it's like trying to find support for a Commodore 64, if you know what that is.
Is that like a video game system? No, I'm sorry. So then, further elaborating on that a bit, now that you've spent so many years working on player systems and seeing how they've developed, if you could tell the player system manufacturers one thing, one flaw that you see consistently, what would it be?
I wish there were better standards for aftermarket technicians who installed the player systems to be a little bit more consistent. I would say that about aftermarket player systems. From the manufacturer standpoint, between the Spirio and the Disc lavir, the only two manufacturer installed player systems, I have never really seen a flaw with those systems.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah, it's nice to know. Like when you're talking about a Yamaha Disc lavir and a customer has an issue, I've been working on them for 20 years, and I can honestly say 9 times out of 10, it's the customer's issue, not the piano's issue.
So I should write that one down so I never forget it ever. I think I actually do have it written down somewhere, but I believe you also served for a time as the service manager for Jacobs Music.
Yep, the last 5 years I was with Jacobs Music, I was the service manager. That is correct.
So then, what are some of the most important lessons that you learned during your time as a service manager?
I would say going from piano technician to service manager was a transition, and you have to get used to it, and you have to brace yourself for that because you're not only responsible. I mean, you're not responsible for your schedule anymore. You're responsible for everybody's schedule, everybody's well-being, making sure that you understand finances, you understand basically how money works inside of a large company or even a medium-sized company. The training of your technicians. I mean, your technicians are your assets, and you need to treat them well, and you need to work them to their strengths as well as keep them happy and motivate them. And I would say those types of things is what I learned a lot about. If I didn't have the experience of being the service manager and running payroll and doing financial analyzing in that position, I don't think I would be as successful at Allied Piano as I am today.
And you started as a technician for Jacobs Music, correct?
That's correct, yep.
So then, what are the most valuable things you've learned about running your own business, and what are some business practices that you feel are a must for staying organized, managing contracts, negotiating pricing, taking jobs, etc.?
Well, the rules are kind of yours. Don't think for 1 second because you own your own business or run your own business or whatever that you can just set your own hours. That doesn't work. When you own a business, you are working 100% of the time. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. With that being said, make sure you have strong limits on when you are and when you are not working. Because if there's no work-life balance, and I know if I don't control my own work-life balance, I will just be working 100% of the time, all of the time.
And then you would probably go crazy.
Probably, if I'm not already there.
Yeah. But I know that also really dramatically affects the quality of the work you do because it's a lot easier to tap out early on a job because you're tired and frustrated and don't feel like doing it anymore.
Yeah, and I would say 5 minutes everywhere makes a huge difference all of the time. So if you just take that extra 5 minutes, and it doesn't have to be 5 minutes, but you take that extra 10 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, and it adds up to 5 minutes over time, really completes the job, whether it's a technical job or a business job.
Well said. Well said. So, working with you at University of Pennsylvania, you had so many valuable insights on negotiating institutional contracts. So, if you were to help guide somebody through negotiating their first contract, What are some guidelines and percentages that you can recommend?
I would say the first thing is you have to do an inventory analysis so you know exactly what you're working with. And from there, you build your own spreadsheet or database of what pianos are in that institution and what their needs are and what you personally can provide to that institution. From there, one of the key things that always seems to work, because now I take care of 3 different colleges, you do an inventory analysis and then you write, no more than a 2-page letter with the first paragraph basically saying, if you had to replace all these pianos, this is how much it would cost. 9 times out of 10, it blows whoever's reading its mind to the point of like, oh no, okay, so now we have millions of dollars worth of assets rather than a couple of $100 of junky pianos. Does that make sense?
It does. I wrote down a specific quote from you from several months ago. You said you should request 5% of the total replacement value of the school pianos. So if it's 1.5 million, one might ask for 75,000 as a bid.
Yes. So the way that works is, and this wasn't me. Somebody else came up with this. I think it was Steve Carver up at Juilliard, I think. But his rule of thumb was the annual service budget should be 5% of the current retail value of all of the pianos.
Golly. Yeah, that is such a useful stat, especially if you've never done that before. The first time I was placing my bid, I was not sure how competitive it would be or how much I would actually end up working. And I remember referencing that number and being really grateful to have that written down.
And I would say for people who are starting out, don't expect to get that number. Because, I mean, if you have $2 million worth of pianos, that's a really high number. And the administration's going to be like, well, that's insane. We used to pay our old technician XYZ dollars, and that was it. But that number goes towards tuning, repairs, maintenance, partial rebuilding. I hate full rebuilding, but partial rebuilding like the actions and hammers and things, and piano replacement. If you don't have a program in line to start to replace the oldest of the instruments, then the pianos will just keep getting worse and worse and worse over time.
How many pianos do you think the average starter technician should feel comfortable taking on as their first institutional contract?
You kind of have to figure out how many pianos you can do in a week. And I would set that up as your starting point. And if you can only do, say, 15 pianos in a week, and your college has 100 pianos, you're going to be in trouble because it's going to be like 60% of your annual income, and it's going to be a lot of work all of the time unless you have help come in.
So when you say 15 pianos a week, do you just mean tuning without any kind of regulation or servicing or maintenance or anything?
Yeah, I would say, whatever is an hour and a half in front of a piano every day, 15 times a day, or 15 times a week, rather.
So then when you're building the spreadsheet initially of the school pianos, what are some key things that you're really looking out for? What are some red flags?
Generally, the condition of the piano. One giant big red flag for me today is anything that has ivory keys probably should be replaced. Number one.
Ooh, okay. I love that. For school, especially.
Exactly, yeah. Anything that has ivory on it is already automatically at least 70 years old. And in institutional terms, that's 70 times 4, right? Because what I say is like every year in the institution's like 4 years in a home.
That tracks. That's also a really good number to know. Okay, so you are an experienced rebuilder. I know that rebuilding is kind of a complicated subject depending on who you ask. So given your experience with rebuilding, how do you feel it's affected the industry overall?
Okay. I should say I'm not a rebuilder. I have never done belly work. Ever.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, I've never done belly work. I've done finish work. I've done action work. When I rebuild an action, it is quite literally I pull the piano into my shop. I don't take the action home. I pull the piano into my shop, and everything between the dampers and the pedals gets replaced. So, a real action rebuild. I feel like replacing actions and rebuilding actions is just part of the long-term maintenance of a well-used piano. A 20-year-old piano that gets heavily used with deep string grooves, you can replace the hammers, but that's only part of the job. What should happen is everything between the dampers and pedals gets replaced. The hammers are just a indicator of what the rest of the action's going through, right? So If the hammers have that deep of string grooves, just think of what's going on inside the pedal box, say like on a Steinway with the felts and how the pedals are put together. All that's it's crushed, it's smushed together, or the trackwork leather pads, they're all deformed and dented. So everything should get replaced between the dampers and the pedals. So, as far as the other side with like full on piano rebuilding, I'm kind of against it. I've always been against it. I've always been a proponent of you should buy new pianos because no matter what, say you had a piano for 60 years, okay, and then you rebuild it, it's not going to last another 60 years. At best, it might last another 30 or 20, and then it has to be rebuilt again. So now we're two steps away from the original piano. It's that, the farmer's axe. Do you know what I'm talking about with the farmer's axe story?
No.
Okay, so the farmer has an axe. All right, he uses the axe to chop wood all the time, and the blade gets dull. So he grinds down the blade and replaces the blade and puts it on the stick, and now the stick is broken. So now he replaces the stick on the head of the axe, and now is it the same axe as he used before? Absolutely not.
Completely different axe. Right.
Right.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, also, I feel like this will probably end up being a common question or subject that I bring up on this podcast because the other issue I feel with rebuilding is how extraordinarily difficult it is to do it well. And I feel like most technicians, I feel like I listen to people talk about rebuilding for about 5 to 6 minutes and I can decide, this is 100% not something I should be doing without an enormous amount of oversight or guidance or experience to supplement it. So, out of curiosity, where did you learn to do the action rebuilds? Was that at Jacobs?
That was actually in college. The very first thing
What?
I did was bore and shape hammer tails because that's what my mentor did. He only wanted to use the stuff that he built, so he bored his own hammerheads for all his grand action rebuilds. So that's the first thing I did before I even started tuning.
Would it be out of line for me to ask how good you felt the quality of the work was looking back?
Looking back, some of those pianos I still service today. I
No
think it was
kidding.
perfectly fine. Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would say is that at the time we used hide glue for almost everything, and by today's standards, technology has moved well beyond hide glue.
Agreed.
So we don't need to use it anymore.
Okay, so then at what point in a piano's life do you recommend doing the rebuild work for institutions versus in homes? Because I imagine you also have to maneuver institutional budgets and those kinds of logistical difficulties. So is that something you would maybe try to procrastinate on more or?
That kind of depends on the institution and its priorities. So, for instance, University of Pennsylvania routinely sends me 3 pianos to do every summer. And this last year, University of the Arts sent me 5 pianos to do along with the 3 pianos that I did with University of Pennsylvania. I don't think it's going to always happen like that, but building into the budget of that 5% of the total retail cost of the inventory when you have 194 pianos, it's a pretty big number, and we can either start to buy new pianos or we could start to refresh the ones that can be refreshed. So as far as when, there's not really a time limit, but there's a condition limit. If the piano is no longer voiceable, if it's no longer playable, then it's time to start to think about action rebuilds.
Okay, so then I want to transition more towards your history as a mentor and teacher to technicians of all backgrounds and ages, me included, definitely. I know that you swore by the Steinway masterclasses and you teach a number of or you teach a polyester repair class. What are ways that new technicians can look out for good value in the education that they're paying for?
Well, manufacturer classes are always high value to me because you're getting the information right from the mouth of the manufacturer. If Steinway says this is the way we should do it, that's the way you should do it because they're the ones who build the product, they're the ones that maintain the product, and they have a certain standard that you should follow, right? You can disagree with them all you want, but at the end of the day, you're just another technician. They're the manufacturer.
What about how factory technicians don't actually get to see their pianos once they are sent out into the field, into the world, and they don't necessarily know how the pianos age or mature?
I think, well, when you're taking a class from, say, Steinway, for instance, you're not talking to a factory technician. You're talking to the person who is in charge of teaching what they're supposed to be teaching. It's kind of like you know who Don Menino is, right? From Kauai.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was never a Kauai factory technician. He was the head of their education, research and development, and all that other stuff. Okay,
Right,
he didn't
right.
work. He may have, I don't know, but I can't imagine Don, living in Japan for the last, for 30 years, working in the factory all the way up to becoming a U.S. technician. It doesn't work like that. You talk about somebody like Kent Webb at Steinway. He came from Baldwin and other backgrounds and took on a position as an instructor for Steinway. He wasn't on the floor installing dampers or hanging hammers or doing any of that stuff. So it's kind of like apples and oranges there.
What about correspondence courses?
I don't believe they should exist in 2023.
Okay.
Now, don't get me wrong. I have a whole lecture on what you should and shouldn't read as a piano technician. And I think you should read all the books that I think you should read. But you can't learn how to tune a piano by reading a book.
Right,
Period.
right. Do you have a top 3 favorite books to recommend to starter techs?
Yes. The top 3, I guess, would be On Pitch by Rick Balduson. It's a fantastic book. There are the 3 Swedish textbooks. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but it's a series of 3 collegiate type textbooks that have tuning, regulation, and repairs for both grand and upright.
I might have to ask you for the names of those later.
Sure. Finally, after that, Brian Capleton from England, a friend of mine, has a regulation book that takes the big process of regulation and simplifies them down to principles that every piano and every type of different action, and says, okay, principle number 1 through 6, these are the things that you need to strive for, rather than saying, turn the let off button, do this, do that. It's a great, and it's a small book, but it's a great book.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of those larger overarching concepts and principles are a lot harder to explain in a way that is easy to
Yeah,
understand.
you need to know the regulation process to understand the book,
Ah, okay.
but
Gotcha.
once you're at that point, your mind just kind of opens up and you become the regulation rather than do the regulation.
Oh, that's beautiful.
It's cheesy.
Thank you, Sensei.
So cheesy.
No, I love that. I love that. Hi, this is McKinley real quick and a post-production note to say that Greg and I both realized after recording this episode that we forgot to mention the most notable Pianos Inside and Out by Mario Y. If you don't already have that book in your library, you're seriously missing out. Anyway, back to the show. So then, in terms of techs looking for good value out of education that they're paying for, what about starter techs who might be in geographical locations that might not have as many resources available or teaching resources?
Right out of the gate, North Bennett Street is going to be the best bang for your buck. If you can find somebody to work with, expect to have to pay. The traditional mentorships of yesteryear I think, are completely gone. The reason I say that is, like, I look at my career and I look at what I do on a daily basis, and I have several private students, and I have to cancel every so often just because I'm so busy, right?
Right.
If I took on an apprentice, that I'd have no time to do actual work. So apprenticeships are nice. If you can work with somebody, expect to have to pay, but I would also vet who you're working with.
How would you vet somebody, do you think?
That's a good question, because it's hard. For a new technician, you don't know what you don't know. And the worst thing that you can do is get a technician who has bad habits or shortcuts. Okay, I don't have a problem with shortcuts per se, but anybody who's a music theory major knows Bach, who was the father of all music theory, broke all his own rules all of the time because he knew which rules to break and when they would work. You can take a shortcut if you have A, you plan on going back and doing it right, and B, you can take that shortcut and it's going to be fine.
Right.
If all you know are the shortcuts, then you don't know what you're doing.
I'm really interested in maybe trying to make a list of red flags to look out for when vetting potential mentors.
Look at their damper work. If their damper work is good, that everything moves nice and evenly and everything cuts off nice and evenly, they're probably a pretty good technician.
The damper work is a really good one. That's also an area that I'm always constantly trying to do better at because damper work is such a pain in the etc. Okay, so then what makes a student excel in piano technology, and what are some things that tend to hold students back in their careers?
Practicing. In my short time of my recent short time of teaching a lot of students, I can tell who practices and who doesn't, who has the right work ethic and who doesn't. And if you're not going to practice piano tuning, it's not going to happen. Two students, one started last year, so she's been a student for 2 years, and then another student started in January. The second student that started in January has far excelled past the student that started 2 years ago because they practice. They practice all the time. They're at the point now where I can hire them and put them in the field because they're practicing and they have their tuning times down to roughly an hour and 45 minutes, which is okay.
Starting out, yeah.
Not too bad for 8 months in, but the other student was still taking 3, 4, 5 hours because they weren't practicing.
I hope all our young listeners are paying attention to that. What do you feel are some of the most common mistakes that you see veteran technicians do versus newbies?
The worst technician you could possibly have is the one that thinks they know everything, right?
Of course.
So a veteran technician, let's say the technician's been a piano technician full-time for the past 30 years. And so now we take that number and we look at like how many veteran technicians are there actually. The problem with that number is, and everybody forgets this, when I am old and feeble and will have been doing piano technology for 100 years, I will be the only one, right? Because I started tuning pianos at the age of 19, 18 actually. When you look at the average age of piano technicians, you're looking at somebody who's 58, 65, 70, whatever the case is. But how long do you really think they've been a piano technician? What I'm saying is that most of the time, piano technology is a second career. You're a college professor, you're an engineer, you're a musician, you've retired and taken on piano technology at the age of 65.
So perhaps the most common mistake for veterans is that they are set in their ways, or they're less likely to re-examine their work or second guess their work.
Well, I'm just saying, like, a technician who's been in the business for 40 years, 30 years, 20 years isn't really a thing unless it's us or going to be us, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, I've been a piano technician because it's been my first career. Like, I graduated college, I still had a band and I did all those other things, but my primary job was being a piano technician from the age of 22, full time, after college. When you think about it, here I am 20 years later, and when you think about somebody who might look the part of being older and seeming like they've been around pianos their entire lives, but only come to realize that they've only been in the business for 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
Right.
That's what I'm getting
Okay.
at. Just because they have the right age and look doesn't mean that they've been in the business for that long.
Gotcha. Okay. Good point. Fair point. Well, I do feel like one habit that I have tried to maintain since I started is that no matter how much I am practicing basic concepts, basic regulation and voicing concepts, there's still a part of me that always wants to ask somebody for a second opinion, because so often with those early basic principles, there's so often a small way that somebody is doing it better, or that I could be doing it better, or that it could be finessed in a way that makes it that much better. And once your earlier skills are, as refined as possible, then it feels like you're really in the top percentage of technicians.
Yeah, and you're never going to be done learning, right? So that you're always going to learn somebody else's technique that gets it that much further. It's 99.7%. That next person brings it along to 99.8%. And it's like a tangent. It just keeps going and going and going, rather than, it's never going to be perfect, but you can always strive for the perfection.
Yeah, yeah. What's your favorite thing that you've learned recently?
The favorite thing that I've learned recently? That's a really good question. I don't know. I can say the favorite thing that I've learned that I use every day.
Yes.
The favorite thing that I've learned that I use every day is at every tuning, I do some voicing with a chopstick needle. I learned this trick a long time ago from Eric Chandel at Steinway, and said, if you just voice one note, if you just correct a series, 1, 2, 3 notes in the piano at every tuning, A, your tuning will sound better, and B, you will be learning how to voice. So by the end of the year, you will have literally voiced hundreds, if not thousands, of hammers.
That's a great tip. Well, we could go down the voicing rabbit hole, but I have all these questions, Greg. You're so full of useful information. Okay, so we've covered rebuilding, we've covered institutions, we've covered plurisystems. What are some common refinishing mistakes?
The first common mistake that I always get is over-promising and under-delivering. Okay, that's the number one thing. Going in there gung-ho saying it's going to be perfect, and then the customer says, well, I can still see it. And then they call somebody else, and it's like, well, actually, they did a great job, but it is what it is. I would say after that, the most common mistakes that I see while not refinishing, but like touch-up, is that the people who are using the tools aren't using them properly. So, for instance, sandpaper, you don't need to press hard into the piano to sand. The sandpaper is going to do its job. Just let it do its job. Just push the sandpaper across the piano and it will sand. You don't need to dig in with the sandpaper. That's usually the start of a bigger problem. So that's the most common mistake that I see.
Wow. Okay. Good to know. So, similarly, I know that you have, I don't know if it's an article or a series of articles on ProPTN about, I don't know if it's polyester or refinishing, but I know that you have some kind of refinishing article on ProPTN.
Yep.
And I remember reading it kind of earlier on just because I was curious. And you had written it very concisely, but I did feel the unease. Like maybe the first time you're voicing a higher end piano and maybe you're anxious about doing it wrong or something like that. Where do you feel like technicians should be comfortable beginning with refinishing? Do you feel like they should try as hard as they can to have some kind of oversight or guidance similarly to when we're all first learning to tune a piano? Is the one-on-one very important, or do you feel like with an article like that, it's really, you just have to have the guts to dive in?
I would say there definitely needs to be hand-holding at the outset, taking a furniture repair class, doing that sort of thing to get you started, and then acquiring some practice pieces, whether they're benches that are going to be thrown away at the dealership or the movers or whatever. Grab those up and practice on them after you've taken a class. Having somebody look at your work who is an accomplished furniture repair person is also a good idea, because they can tell you what you did wrong and how to make it right. And just like tuning, just like everything else, if you take a furniture repair class and then don't do anything for 30 weeks or 2 years, everything you learned 2 years ago is invalid, right?
Right.
So you need to practice. It all comes down to practice, 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 practice.
So then, what do you feel are some of the most common aural tuning mistakes that you see people make when they're starting out? Veterans or newbies, if it's any different.
For newbies, I feel like they push the bass too flat sometimes. And for the aural side of the treble, I feel like sometimes it's usually like the last octave, especially the last 3 notes, they push it way sharp. Way, 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 way sharp. I've seen it, I don't know, that's probably the most common thing I see when I follow an aural technician. They just make those last 3 notes really sharp, almost inaudible.
So why do you think that is?
I think I know why it is, and I think it's... Get ready for the Greg Cheng dissertation about stretch.
Hit me with it. I am ready. I am buckling up.
Jack Stebbins wrote an article and taught a class on from North Bennett Street called Let the Piano Tell You. And it's all about stretching the piano. And I'm paraphrasing drastically, and I'm sorry if I misquote Jack or anything like that. But the piano has a natural stretch to it. When we technicians get involved, there is this thought that we need to push the stretch wider than the piano should accept. And so the high end gets really sharp. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
The piano has a natural stretch. And part of my dissertation is like a 4 to 2 octave. Is that a stretched octave? A 4 to 2 octave, when you do the tests, if the tests are equal beating at a 4 to 2 octave, it's already a stretched octave because we're already listening to a partial that's above a 2 to 1 octave. That's the natural stretch in the piano. So a 4 to 2 octave does not have to be stretched further to make it a correct 4 to 2 octave, because that's a 4 to 2 plus octave.
So then, over the course of all these different subjects and jobs and positions and areas of expertise, can you tell us about your favorite aha moment from your career and perhaps an aha tip, trick, or concept that you think your peers may not already know outside of the voicing for every tuning tip, because that was already a really good one.
Yeah, I would say if you're a business owner, you need to either have access to or take a class. And like when we talk about business finance, you can totally do that online. But take a class on taxes, take a class on business finances, balancing a spreadsheet and QuickBooks and all that stuff, because the aha moment for me was, even if you have an accountant, you should know how to do your own books, only because I want to make sure that the accountant's correct.
Wow. That's diligence to a degree that I am not familiar with, but bravo. I applaud you.
Well, thank you. Steve is basically the CFO of the company, and he does a lot of work, and we work together on a lot of these things. When you're contracting with technicians, make sure that their duties and everything is well spelled out and whatnot. And the aha moment was making sure that you know what you're doing and having the business finance classes behind you. It helped me when I was a service manager. It helped me in this business, and I'm grateful that I took the time to take those classes.
Did you take them online or in person?
I took them online, yeah.
Do you have any recommendations?
Believe it or not, the ones I took were on Udemy, udemy.com. They're not very expensive. They can be very expensive, but it's kind of a learn at your own pace type of, I wouldn't call them an institution, but you can get certificates of completion, I guess. But the stuff that I learned and I could learn at my own pace really, really helped.
Amazing. Okay, so then to close us out and wrap us up, since this has been such an excellent interview, covered so many areas, can you tell us your favorite part of piano technology and your favorite tool?
Okay, so my favorite part of piano technology is getting to meet everybody's pets.
I think I've seen your dog pictures on Instagram. They're really good.
I love meeting people's pets. No, and in all seriousness, I love meeting the people and working with all different types of pianos. My favorite part is that I don't have to sit in an office all day and type away at a computer or do this or do that. Working in a shop is fun, but at a certain point in time, you kind of feel like you're punching the clock, right? So being on the road, that's my favorite part of piano technology. My favorite tool is my chopstick voicing needle. I use it all the time.
Is it just the one off of Shaft?
Yeah, the little brass one. I have 3 of them with 3 different size needles that I use.
Oh. Do you have a preference for different size needles for different hammers or different kinds of pianos?
Well, no, different accomplishments. What I'm trying to do. So, like, if I'm doing voicing right at the top of the hammer, I want to use a very shallow needle. If I'm voicing at the shoulders, I want a very deep needle.
Hi, it's me again. I know we're almost to the end of the episode, but I just wanted to add a quick note of clarification about this. When I asked this question, I had been thinking about the size of the needle in numbers, like number 5 needles, number 6 needles. What Greg had been talking about was adjusting the length of the needles so that they would penetrate different depths in the hammers. So if you're just practicing voicing in the field for the first time, that is an important thing to take note of. Well, thank you for joining us, Greg. I've really enjoyed this, and I look forward to the next time we get to see you out in the field.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning into the show today, and thank you to Greg Cheng for joining us. Allied Piano and Finish distributes their own products as well as supplies from Piano Lifesaver, Corey, Jansen, Koenig, Manzerna, and Lake One. In addition to providing piano tuning and maintenance of the highest caliber to the Philadelphia region, they also provide training seminars and educational opportunities. If you'd like to attend one of Greg's upcoming polyester repair classes in the spring or summer, visit alliedpiano.com to register.